Apparently it was a well-known secret in Hollywood and newsrooms that movie mogul Harvey Weinstein is a serial predator who routinely groped and harassed young women. So why did it take decades for the media to report it? It's been a whirlwind week for one-time Hollywood wunderkind Harvey Weinstein.
Just a short time ago, the directors of his company officially let him go, firing him.
Weinstein's firing came less than a week after the New York Times first detailed allegations of sexual harassment, assault, and crude behavior.
For decades, these stories, these whispers followed him around.
Except there were more than whispers. One-time New York Times reporter Sharon Waxman says she had a lot of the same details 13 years ago, a story the Times would not print.
The piece was gutted, not spiked. The piece did run, but there was no reference to sexual anything or women in the piece.
And Waxman wasn't the only reporter to meet obstacles. NBC contributor Ronan Farrow says the network refused to run his story, too. So he took it elsewhere.
I walked into the door at the New Yorker with an explosively reportable piece that should have been public earlier. And immediately, obviously, the New Yorker recognized that. And it is not accurate to say that it was not reportable. In fact, there were multiple determinations that it was reportable at NBC.
NBC executives claim the story was not well enough sourced. But the HuffPo says that's not true, that the company was pressured to back down by Weinstein himself, something he has done in the past.
And he was also able to bury stories that he didn't want to see published.
So complicit was the press in keeping the story under wraps that the LA Press Club honored Weinstein with its Truth Teller Award earlier this year. And that you can't make up. However, I did speak to the LA Press Club today, and last night they had a meeting and rescinded that award. So they had to. I mean, even though it was for a documentary about a kid who'd been wrongfully accused, I mean, they had to take his name off that. But this is sort of a pattern of things when you fear this litigious society or the power of someone like Harvey Weinstein, that you're not going to get a piece of the action if you're an actor or a producer or even a reporter in some respects. It's this fear of being out on a limb, being the only, and having somebody chase you down and sue you over it, that I think stopped most of these people for as long as they did, although you saw that Sharon Waxman and Ronan Farrow both had it.
Well, you know, this is in part a story of powerful institutions not wanting to go with this explosive charge. NBC News has a lot to answer for not putting this story on their airwaves. But it's more than that, because the late David Carr of the New York Times, Ken Auletta of the New Yorker, really had many elements of this story, and they just couldn't bring it home. Their institutions would not have killed their stories if they were able to bring that in, but they just weren't able to. This is fear, intimidation, wanting to suck up to somebody who can make your career. It's just awful on so many levels.
Networks are traditionally more skittish.
It's also the way our culture treats Hollywood, and journalism gets caught up in that sometimes. I feel like a lot of journalists have no problem speaking truth to power when it's government and they're fulfilling that watchdog function, but it's often a lot harder to speak truth to power when it's money and power and entertainment industry power. Or sports, yeah. It gets a lot harder. There's this weird dynamic always, and I've been a reporter covering entertainment, and access is currency. You have to sort of suck up to the press, the press folks who work for the celebrities who will grant the access or withhold the access. So there's a different set of rules and relationships that govern the celebrity press.
Well, and there's still, and not making any apologies for the press of the LA Times, for instance. You say NBC has something to answer for. I think the LA Times is humiliated by this whole episode. But I think one of the problems, and you mentioned David Carr and Ken Auletta and others who had touched on this story, the barrier to getting that into the public record was always having someone on the record or having a court document that would let you get there. They didn't quite have that. And there is a difference. Yes, Harvey Weinstein is in the public eye, so that the libel issue is not so much there. But I think the ethical issue is there, is we do have a higher standard in reporting on the private lives of somebody who is not in public office than we do somebody who holds a public trust. So I think that meant that in order to get over that line with Weinstein, you had to have something a little more than had he been in the public office somewhere, somehow. So how much is enough? That was always the question. And now in retrospect, you look back and say, well, wow, there was more than enough. What held people back? And power is part of it. I think with NBC, the president of NBC News, my God, this is somebody who's looking to have a career in Hollywood. How did that happen?
Yeah.
But
so I think there's two things to pick up on. First of all, NBC was the network years ago with the burning truck controversy.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Dateline.
There was Dateline, and they got into a whole heap of trouble because there was some...
Michelle Gillen.
Yes. There were facts that didn't pan out, and it was supposed to be a big exposure, so I think they're very sensitive. So there's that. That's not an excuse for them. The second part, you mentioned, Joanna, about society and Hollywood. Let's not take our eye off the ball here. These are women who have been sexually assaulted and raped. In some cases, they are claiming. And that is something that has to be believed if the woman comes forward. And yet, the reason they don't come forward is that they are not believed. I don't care if you're at Hollywood. I don't care if you're working at, Walgreens. Nothing. So if you know that you're not going to be believed, how then are you going to get Ronan Farrow? You're not going to talk to him. Though I would suggest one thing. Now that we know that a lot of this stuff is going on and that maybe some gates will be opened if one woman steps forward, what if, I'm thinking now, I wasn't doing this, the reporter, Ronan or whomever, or Ken Auletta said, I have one woman, and she will come forward if I get others. But just to know you won't be alone. I don't know if that would have broken the dam to take it over the top, but that's what they needed was a couple more people.
Some of those women took payouts,
well, of course they did.
Payoffs,
yes.
and signed non-disclosure. So they feared some kind of financial retribution if they came forward after the fact. They didn't want to lose whatever money they had gotten.
But when it came down to it, two of them, now Rose McGowan, who took a buyout or payout, and also the Italian model, but the Italian model gave up that tape.
That was
I mean, come on, she had to be a part of giving up that tape, even though it was held by the New York City police people, and Rose McGowan has come forward even though she took that money. So I think, again, it's the numbers and it's the understanding that you're not alone that might have helped. But that's the tough nut to crack.